Nicole, you can, there we go. So you're very welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for making the time. This session this morning is about service opportunities for young people, and it has come about from a report that was made to the government in England a few weeks ago, and it's called the Kruger Report. We're calling it the Kruger Report. It was written by a gentleman called Kruger, and the report is called Levelling Communities. And a lot in it about this whole idea of a social covenant, about the need for change under 3 different areas: power, people and places. And we were interested because under the section about people, it started to talk about this whole idea of service opportunities for young people, and looking at whether it was a threat or an opportunity for young people, and how that would fit in terms of recovery and renewal within recovering from the pandemic. So we are going to explore that theme this morning, just take a little look at it in a wee bit more depth, and then basically we will divide into groups to maybe have another think about if time allows for that, and really just give you an opportunity to think a wee bit more about what that means in terms of, because as people around this screen, our interest is about youth volunteering. So this concept is something that we need to maybe have a think about in light of that. Jane from our own team will share a little bit about what we do in Northern Ireland in terms of youth volunteering, just to provide that context. So I'm delighted that we have Mohsen Gull with us. He has told me I can call him Mo. So Mo, you are very welcome. And we know that you have an interest in youth volunteering right around the world. In fact, at the moment you are sitting in Pakistan. So I will not say anything more, and I will allow you to introduce yourself to the group here, and then to share your thoughts on the whole idea of service opportunities for young people. So thanks, Mo.
Thank you so much, Sandra, and thanks, Wendy, for making the introduction, and of course, for Sandra for the invitation. I'm honored and delighted to be a part of this discussion. Just let me know if you can hear me well, otherwise I'll switch off my video. My internet's a little shady.
Be maybe a little louder, certainly for me, but...
Is it better now?
That's better, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So about myself, I'm a third culture kid. I'm originally from Pakistan, still come under the category of young people. So I've been working with a lot of young peers for almost 8-9 years now, and in various capacities. More recently, my PhD, I've just completed it on youth volunteering, and trying to look how young people could be mainstreamed into various governance mechanisms. So very pertinent to what we're going to talk about today. But more than studying this, I've experienced this as a young person myself, and also have been in rooms where I've been in a position to think about in terms of policy, where how and why volunteering is defined a certain way, what entails volunteering, can volunteering ever be paid, things like that. So questions which are so important to when it comes to civil society taking the right actions to engage communities effectively. And more recently, I'm involved with IAVE, which is the International Association for Volunteer Effort, on undertaking a global scoping paper exercise. We were trying to understand what are the global trends in youth volunteering, and how at multi levels of governance or engagement, these could be effectively mainstreamed. So that's a bit about myself. The way I want to break down my talk with you is in 3 key components. Firstly, I want to talk to you about my own positionality as a young person into going into this discussion. Next, I'll comment on what I'm also calling the Kruger Report. Really trying to make sense of what it is trying to sell, and to what extent it's able to justify its arguments. And finally, I'll make a case in front of you from other research and evidence as to where we stand, and is this the uh, right approach to go. So if you like the idea, give me a thumbs up, please. because I can see all your faces. Thank you. Uh, right. So in terms of my positionality, as I said, I'm a third culture kid. I've lived in various countries. I've lived in the UK for almost 8 years now. And I've always felt, do I belong to this community or do I not belong to this community? Am I a disadvantaged group member in this community or am I, and it can be defined differently in different community contexts. So when I was reading the Kruger report, I was just trying to make sense of it as a young person myself. And having gone through the whole COVID pandemic, as you all are going through with me in this, trying to make sense how much can I relate to it, and then taking a step back and reflecting on it in a more academic or research manner or from my own field practitioner point of view. Is this viable or is this sustainable? So such questions came to my head when I was trying to make sense of it. So now I'll really talk to you about the report itself. It's an interesting one. I don't think it's not well intentioned or it's but I think it's not well informed. That's my broader analysis of the report. I think it has some elements which are very interesting, but it definitely is a reactive policy making or a reactive strategy design product. You can sense that some of the ideas are quite uh, loud and they're trying to push for them, but they may not be well informed in terms of where are they originating from and what's the strategy impact they're trying to look for in the short term and long term. And that is where I really, really appreciate volunteers now's effort to make sense of it and really comment and criticize it in a healthy way to look how effective such a model could be in their own context. Um, so just to give you a context of the report, I'm not going to explain the whole report, but I'll just pick some elements which are really interesting to me or some words and how I made sense of them. So for example, the report is pushing for communities to come together in this new era of economic and social policy. So the way they go into defining it is something that's a space, a new space, and almost all programming around communities engagement has to be rethought, which in a way is an overstatement because community resilience has been proven again and again in different scenarios, and COVID is not entirely different from that. So, but I understand there are new economic challenges, new social policy challenges. So the report is really predicting more around unemployment, as it says that 4 million people will be out of work. It's particularly estimating about 500,000 young people will be entering long-term employment. So it's trying to persuade us or making a case for how young people should be made a part of or wired into the social infrastructure in a way that it is also helpful to them financially. So that's the main premise of how they want to support young people. Now, there are various ways through which they want to do it. One way is to something when the 2008 recession happened, a future jobs fund was put together and 100,000 jobs were introduced in the public sector for young people. In 2020, a similar scheme, sort of a kickstart scheme, has been announced by the government under the Prime Minister's Build Back Better or Build agenda, where they're pushing for 350,000 young people entering the job market and mostly in private sector as opposed to public sector. So the report is making a case that instead of just focusing on the private sector, we need to open up the public sector, the civil society sector, or the third sector to this opportunity as well. And it's trying to push for that, young people in their own local communities through public offices or civil society organizations could start playing a more meaningful role into what they are calling social and environmental projects, which have not been really defined in the report. Uh, Building on this, the report also suggests, in terms of volunteering in particular, it suggests a volunteer passport system one way to, have a digital platform or a passport sort of a, for example, you have to go through DBS check once. You have all your volunteer experience collated in one system. So they're really trying to, since the surge in volunteerism during COVID-19, they really think there is a value for having a volunteer passport where you can, in a way, it's a supply and demand software where volunteer involving organizations, for example, Volunteer Now can find volunteers against the kind of skills they're looking for or the time they're looking for. And young people or other people who want to volunteer can be on a system and they'll have access to these organizations or channels. It does caution us that they're not entirely trying to formalize volunteering. They're very much open to informal volunteering or community-led volunteering as well. And it's okay for that not to be on the volunteer passport system, but they would want to streamline such a system, which I see is of value for bringing digital innovation in it. And then it goes on to say that based on this volunteer passport system, they want to formulate a national volunteer reserve where young people and other stakeholder groups or who like to volunteer would be, in a way, a database would be there. And the problem is the report doesn't really build on existing work that's been done. For example, We Inspired is a platform for young people to gain most of the, access to volunteering societies and clubs and organizations. But the report doesn't even make a mention of such initiatives already out there. So in a way, it's slightly less informed when it comes to what is already happening. Now, going back to the job scheme, Kickstart scheme, that's an interesting one. So they are suggesting that they will deploy 100,000 young people on a range of social environmental projects, ultimately trying that there is public engagement impact, which usually comes from volunteering, but they will pay young, sorry.
Rosie, Rosie, can I ask you to mute yourself, please?
Right. So the interesting part is they're asking, they're wanting to pay young people through this Kickstart scheme for doing almost all the community sort of projects they do, and they want to pay them either full time or part. But some key questions which Volunteer Now have identified, like where are these young people? Also, who are these young people who will want to be paid for doing such project? Do they usually volunteer for free? What's the baseline here? What's the business as usual? Why pay them in the first place? And who gets paid? Is it for all youth groups? Do everyone deserve to be paid? Or is it certain groups, for example, belonging to minorities or ethnic minorities and disadvantaged, vulnerable groups? Do they deserve to be paid through such schemes only? So the scheme is really pushing for an idea, but it doesn't go in much detail, which I understand. But it doesn't really cover the big society agenda or the push here. What's the real purpose? Because at one point they're saying, yes, there is unemployment. Then they say, we need to start paying young people more through opportunities. And even if it's around volunteer work, it's okay, we'll pay them. So that's the basis premise from where they're coming from. Now, in my work, I have done a lot of analysis of how governance schemes could effectively bring young people in. First thing that came to my head was, so I followed this French philosopher, Michel Foucault, and use his concepts to analyze most of this work. And Foucault talked about this art of governmentality. Governmentality is art of doing government, okay? So young person is a subject, and how that subject is created, how that subject is used in a good way to help the community, that's what Foucault helps me think through. Now, Foucault uses two words which are really interesting, power and resistance, okay? So think about it. Does who pay dictates the agenda, okay? Now, so if you're being told what to do, by definition, it's not by free will, right? Mostly. And then does it still come under the domain of voluntarism? So there's a whole debate around definition to begin with. Secondly, for example, the report, this Kickstart scheme, I'll read the description which it says in the report. It says that young people will have uh, terms of reference. They'll have to go through a proper, goals and behaviors and time commitments and clear expectations. So, and these roles will be substantial, demanding, and well managed. Firstly, does that say currently what roles young people play in the community, are they not substantial or demanding enough? Second question is, who is dictating this agenda? Okay. Now I dug throughout the report and I found at certain instances it says young people will help define these agendas. But young people can define it at a strategic level. But for example, if volunteer now is trying to create a new role and it has to be paid and it has to be timed and it has to have all the competencies and goals attached to it, in a way you're making it structured, right? Which is not entirely a bad thing, but maybe it's too structured for young people. Young people do not like too structured programs. So no thinking have really gone into that area. They are just suggesting an infrastructure approach, but without undertaking that critical lens that what if it doesn't work, right? We have had examples of overtly structured programs in the past and they haven't worked. Similarly, there are great programs that are already happening. For example, the National Citizen Service, I will step up to serve. And the report simply in a statement says they could also be adopted for this purpose. Are you suggesting that they should also be paying young people or young people pay for it? I don't really understand where they're trying to take it. So the purpose is slightly missing. Now, to make further sense of it from my own work, I dug down into some of the reports and tried to find some evidence, really. Whatever they're saying, does it relate to people in or young people in the UK context as well? So NCVO has drafted a report which came out in January 2019. It's called the Time Well Spent Report. According to it, some interesting findings which go with our discussion today. Firstly, one volunteer out of possible 5 feels that their volunteering is becoming like paid work, which is not a good feeling, right? So, and it's most prevalent between age group of 25 to 34, and also most prevalent amongst frequent volunteers. So when we're seeing rise in young people going for short-term episodic volunteering and not really committing to one organization for a very long time, it becomes tricky when it comes to bringing them on for paid work sort of placements or internships, which they're not calling any of those. They're just calling them projects. So it's a question then, do young volunteers themselves want their volunteering experience to become more like paid work? Okay. Next is, then they looked at what about in experiences where a volunteering coordinator is a paid coordinator. They often feel when the volunteering coordinator is a paid person, yeah, volunteers feel that they cannot influence the development of their work a lot as opposed to an unpaid coordinator. So that again gives us that sense that if a program is so structured and you have to follow terms of references and key competencies and performance indicators, then it does definitely impact how much free will or young people voice can be reflected in the work they're doing. So then I try to identify how do volunteers want to be recognized to begin with? Do they even ask for money? Now, as coming from a country where volunteering is not embedded in our social culture a lot, as opposed to philanthropy, I've always faced this challenge of being by my family, like, you're always volunteering. Why are you always volunteering? When will you get paid for it? So such questions are always at the back of the head, but you always, mask them with your motivation and altruism or stuff like that. So I tried to identify what would possible motivation be. So the report says that receiving thanks is how most volunteers thought they want to be recognized, right? And especially for younger volunteers, it was through recognition in the media, social media, or through different awards. 15% of them said if they knew they could get their expenses paid, will get their expenses paid for the volunteering experience, that would have encouraged them to get involved in the volunteering. But only 15%, and that's not when they're saying to pay them. They're saying for in terms of allowance or expense coverage if they're in the field or helping out there. Because everyone is coming with that understanding of volunteering is out of free will and is unpaid to begin with. Now, the report says that volunteering often overlaps with the world of paid work, right? For example, paid staff managers work and work alongside volunteers. However, it isn't paid work. Volunteering is not paid work, and the distinction is reinforced in our legal nomenclature, in our social understanding. So blurring these lines comes with a cost, and it comes with uh, a big question on the big society concept, like how much of it is out of free will and how much of it is a placement scheme they're trying to put out there. So I think wording is important. They really need to think through what's the purpose here. I understand it's not ill-fated. They're trying to cover up the unemployment that's being generated in the community right now. And naturally, less people will be wanting to use volunteering in their leisure time when they have to worry about their bills. But that does not mean that the importance of volunteering is reduced in any way. I think I still have a bit of time, so I can
Yes,
take
yes,
it.
please.
Sure, thank you. So there was another survey in 2018 around national youth social action. And it's the survey that's done with 10 to 20-year-olds in the UK. And it identified, which takes me to my next point, how such a scheme can really benefit some people in the community, but it may not benefit everyone. There's a significant gap in participation already in the UK when it comes to 10 to 20-year-olds between low-income young people and their wealthier peers. 39% of young people who participate in meaningful social action, at least in 2018, came from affluent backgrounds. So they were from A, B, C1 categories, and only about 31% of them came from the low-income groups. So that, so if as, for example, if I belong to a low-income group and a young person, and if I have an opportunity to work on a climate project in Northern Ireland and I'm being paid through the Kickstart scheme, it's good, right? It's a win-win on surface. But it comes with a caveat. The caveat is often something which the UN uses in UN volunteers. We use this term called waithood. You're pushing me or coercing me into a certain profession or this transition phase where I can, skip from one volunteering to the other volunteering activity and just make money a bit out of it. And then I'm stuck in that false employment paradigm. And in increasingly unemployed young populations, volunteering is often seen as either a negative or a forced experience. So it's not coming out of free will. Maybe I'm not at all interested in climate or environment, but only because it's paying me a certain money, I want to take up that project, right? So it takes away from the real, true purpose and passion that often is exhibited through multiple volunteers. And you see it has impacts. What they might have no interest in the organization to begin with. Volunteer retention may be a big problem after that. So we need to agree that such schemes are not inevitably inclusive, and they can take advantage of certain people in the community who are vulnerable or who would want such opportunities to either come out of a poverty cycle or may go further deep into it in the long run. So the question here is definitely around free will. And as I said, the country context I come from, of most countries you'll see around the world, unlike UK, young people associate negative connotation to the word volunteer. I would rather like to be called an intern, an activist, an unpaid employee, a placement holder, but don't call me a volunteer. And such a scheme has a high potential to push for that understanding amongst young people. Oh, oh, you volunteer for free, but I volunteer for money. So is my volunteering better than yours? You know, that sort of thing. So that was my rant a bit on the report itself, but I'm very much open and happy to, be criticized for my comments, but also discuss in a healthy way how and what's the best way to go about it. Thank you. Over to you, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Mo, for sharing that and really breaking the report down and certainly giving us some food for thought. You know, so a number of the things you said, certainly I'm smiling because we have talked for years about the definition of volunteering. We have talked about who is a volunteer and who's not, and whether to pay or not to pay, all those sorts of stuff. They've been around for a long time. I suppose one of the things, before I asked Jane to share the context, one of the things yesterday, just in a Northern Ireland context, because remember the Kruger Report, the proposals are based in terms of England, and again, they are only proposals at this stage. But yesterday, interestingly, the Department for Communities launched a strategy for 2020 to 2025. And one of the things in it was about increasing and incentivising participation in the labour market and wider society. And they went on to say delivering alongside community-based partners and other sectors. So there's definitely a theme out there. There's definitely a move towards this whole idea of paying people to do a range of things in the community. So Jane, I think it's probably helpful at this stage if you reflect in terms of where we are at in terms of youth volunteering in Northern Ireland. I don't think we'll maybe break into separate groups. I think we will stay in the bigger group. So after you share, we can just have a wider discussion, just so as Mo then is available to chat to everybody. So Jane, if you just share your thoughts.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Mo. It's really interesting, and I hope my wee piece helps. Members around our virtual room will know that we have a really vibrant youth community and voluntary sector who involve young people and have a great history of involving young volunteers, particularly from the age of 14. And we've seen an increase in organisations willing to take them from younger, but it's fair to say that from 16 up, it is more natural for organisations to include young volunteers. And there's a real focus within youth clubs, environmental organisations, sporting organisations, and also places like the charity shops, but also to mention schools and churches and many more organisations who will proactively include young volunteers and young people in really meaningful roles. And I think that's what, Mo, you were getting at there in terms of the need for meaningful roles. And I know Nicola and Ryan from the team are here too, and it is about ensuring that whenever young people come to us and say, I want to volunteer, that we are signposting them in the right direction to organisations that we know that will support them and train them and do that good practice in volunteer management that we like to see within organisations. But we've also seen many young people volunteering independently of organisations, and there has been, I suppose, an increase in that over this last number of months as well too. And we've seen them initiating their own campaigns and developing their own youth-led social action projects. And we know that it's quieter at the moment in terms of particularly volunteering roles and particularly for young people. And we know from engaging with young people that they're kind of saying either they have been stood down along with everybody else in terms of COVID. And I know we're also different from England in relation to that. I know England, particularly within the NHS, did a great push and a great drive to involve young people as volunteers, and that didn't happen in Northern Ireland. But we've still seen lots of organisations that have been really creative in terms of developing roles for young people, particularly with the online world that we've now embraced, that organisations have been able to give them roles that have been enable them to continue to make that impact. But we've also seen the challenges of young people, and particularly in relation to education, and particularly those that are the 16 plus who would have been doing their Duke of Ed, who would have been doing the Millennium Volunteers, who would have been doing lots of different things in terms of ensuring that they had the skills and opportunities and experiences that they wanted to have to continue forward in whatever they wanted to do in life. That the school pressure has kind of said to them, you know, we're going to take a wee step back here. It's not as important at the moment, or we can't fit it all in, or we'll do a wee bit, but we'll not do as much as what we would have been able to do in the past. We do have still about 380 organisations recognising young volunteers through the Millennium Volunteers programme. And last year we recognised just around 4,000 young volunteers, which was fantastic over all of the certificates. And I've got a few stats that I want to share in relation to, there was about 700 who got their 200-hour Awards of Excellence in 2020. One of them just before the closure, and then the other one missed out, the Belfast ceremony missed out, but there was 80% of those young people who responded to say that they had, that they volunteered, they began to volunteer because they wanted to make a difference. And that was their core value. And that goes back to what you were saying, Mo, there in terms of, you know, is it for the payment or is it to make a difference? And our young people who volunteered and got recognition through the MBE programme, it was to make a difference. That came through overwhelmingly and has been over this last number of years. They want to, that sense, they want to know, 95% of them want to know that they are making a useful contribution to their local communities and to the organisations that they're supporting. 51% were saying that they were asked personally to volunteer. And again, that goes back to where they hear that messaging from. There was the next 42% said that they heard through school. So in terms of where their influencers are coming from, it's really important to see that and then understand how we can support that messaging too. Quite a lot, 80% were saying that they received training that they could use again as a volunteer, and it goes back into the organisations then that they're volunteering with and their ability to provide them with training and support, and that they know that that training will help them in terms of whether it's UCAS applications, employability, and helping them to get paid work. Interestingly though, the 78% of those young people were aged 14 to 18. So we do have a challenge in Northern Ireland in terms of encouraging that older population to maybe, you know, I know they're volunteering, but to get recognition for their volunteering is maybe the difference there that we see coming through the Millennium Volunteers programme. And just over 50% of those were from the Catholic community. 71% were female. And again, I have to understand that our Millennium Volunteers programme does take in the sporting bodies, but and they would traditionally be, from the Omnibus survey, traditionally be the ones that would be highly involved in sport. But still, it's an interesting statistic there in terms of the volunteers that we have in Northern Ireland and their gender makeup. And 59% are from a rural area, which is also interesting in terms of the service opportunities and how people get involved in volunteering, their motivations for volunteering, and the support structures that are in and around them in terms of their volunteering as well. And also 91% of those young people receiving their 200-hour award didn't have any long-term illness. So it's again back to the population who are maybe carers, who have maybe a disability, who are maybe disadvantaged in some way, that haven't maybe got the same opportunities to volunteer as other people have. So it's interesting to see the types of young people that are coming through in terms of gaining recognition. They all highly say and comment on the skills that they gain through their volunteering, particularly those personal development skills, those employability skills that we talk about. So in relation to teamwork and confidence, their leadership skills and communication skills, their ability to problem solve and all of those different types of things. But more importantly, it's about their involvement in local community activities. It's the ability to make a difference, to understand that they make the difference, as well as being told that they make the difference. And that recognition is important. But it's the recognition at a very local level as well is what they value, as well as that Northern Ireland wide recognition through a programme like the Millennium Volunteers programme. And we also do and are engaged with the Northern Ireland Partner for the I Will campaign. So you mentioned it, it is closing at the end of December. as the Step Up to Serve charity, but it's hoped that the I Will campaign in itself, in terms of increasing youth social action. And again, they use that word meaningful youth social action a lot in their language, which is really important. And it's hoped that that will continue past the end of the year. We've also got the National Citizen Service in Northern Ireland that is funded through the Department for Communities. And we've also seen the government's commitment to youth volunteering, both throughout DFC, but also the Education Authority have written it into their volunteering strategy as well, internally for the Education Authority. But it's important to note that it's there, and that there is an understanding of the importance and value of young people who are giving up their time of their own free will to make a difference to others, which we have always held on to really tightly within Volunteer Now, and hope that we don't lose that as we go through in terms of the discussion, not only within Kruger but within DFC too. So hopefully that's a wee kind of quick snapshot, Sandra.
Thank you, Jane. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the floor, the screen, and what I would ask you to do is really just to reflect on what you've heard, and in particular, what I'm interested in is what is being proposed in the Kruger, and what Mo has eloquently shared. Is that a threat to volunteering in Northern Ireland? In particular, the words that Mo used around purpose and passion. Are schemes like this going to be a threat to the purpose and passion that we have in Northern Ireland in terms of volunteering? So what I'd ask you to do is just to speak, introduce yourself, and then pose your thought or your question. I encourage you, we have 15 minutes left, I encourage you just to involve yourselves in some discussion around this issue, because it's obviously out there.
Sandra, can I just say something?
You surely can.
Quickly.
I'd be surprised if you didn't.
No, well, first of all, I just nail my colours to the mast here. There's no such thing as paid volunteering as far as I'm concerned. And the other thing is that, I feel I'm going back to the future after 35 years, and in retirement, I still feel I'm going back to the future here with this particular report. But it's actually a question for Mosen that I have. He's recently done a piece of a context paper for IAVI looking at youth volunteering, but particularly youth volunteering leadership. And so I was wondering, because the whole push is to see young people themselves taking responsibility and leading for volunteering, where they think they want to make a difference and they want to make an impact. And particularly on a global level, you see this. So I'd ask Mosen to say, what does he think about that whole area of encouraging youth volunteering leadership? And if you put that lens across the Kruger Report, does he see anything there, or does he see any positive, or does he only see negative? Okay.
I'll try and answer all that in a minute, so everyone has a chance to speak. Firstly, I'm trying to do this exact thing at Asian Development Bank, and I'm also involved with the project with UNDP. But stop calling it volunteering. It's not volunteering. You call it a placement or a fellowship or a shadowing program or whatever. And it's okay, but and it could completely be youth-led. If young people sit on the table and define their terms of reference with guidance from the team, for example, Volunteer Now, it's a win-win. Yeah, they get paid for the work they're doing, but they also contribute effectively. But if it has to be called volunteerism as such, then it has to totally be informed from them. And that was the push for the global paper, that within volunteering, for example, Volunteer Now, that you said, Nicola and Ryan, try to look at whatever project is coming. You're trying to ensure meaningful youth engagement, and that's the premise of youth leadership. But eventually giving them that safe space to not just voice their concerns, but enough system or infrastructure for them to be able to lead and implement all those projects and things in particular. So my question to Kruger Report eventually is, when you say young people doing the social and environmental projects, firstly, who defines those projects? If they're being defined by young people themselves, great. But if they're coming from the civil society and private firms and all, and then it's a placement program, it's not a volunteer scheme. And definitely NCS, I will, and all others can never be mainstreamed into this agenda. So the government really needs to take a step behind and really reflect on what's the bigger picture here. They might need something around the big society agenda or a write-up as to what's the theory of change here. Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Wendy. Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? Anthony?
Sorry about that. There is a bigger issue, and I completely agree with Mo in the fact that this report is not well informed. We're talking about giving money to volunteers for what they're doing. Well, legally, there is a definition of a volunteer worker that the government themselves have fallen foul to in the Coast Guard service, but that's a different story. So we're actually going to give them, and I'm talking from the council point of view, if we start paying volunteers that do some of our jobs or do some of the roles that we use as volunteering, we're then going to create issues with trade unions and different things. And this even going down to the thing, I think it's just not a well-informed paper from that point of view. And it needs to make a definition of actually what is volunteering. And completely with Wendy, that volunteering is an unpaid activity. And what is actually volunteer workers, and how that's going to work. Because if we do pay volunteers, does that bring in that tax and national insurance? And if we are going to pay volunteers, how's that going to affect the universal credit system, which we already know is a nightmare for an awful lot of people? So I just think there is a far bigger picture than the bigger picture we need to look at as volunteering. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of heads, you know, and I just would worry that it's just going to create a murky pool that's going to lose a lot of us and lose a lot of volunteers because they'll just lose interest.
When I first read it, it reminded me, and this is where I unfortunately then show my age, because it reminded me of the old ACE scheme, Action for Community, what was it? Engagement or something, but where people were paid to go out and do different things in the community for a year long and hopefully make them more employable at the end of it. So that's certainly what it reminded me of. Anybody else? The impact on volunteering. You know, how do people feel about this whole area of free will? Helen?
A few things in the report was a bit like going back to the future, not just I'm not as old as you, Sandra, but I was
Thanks very much.
talking about the ACE scheme, so it did remind me a bit of that as well. And the passport was also something that wasn't new. It has been mentioned before in the big society, so it was disappointing from the view that these were things that have been proposed before and haven't ever been seen through. And also just picking up on some things that have already been said around the lack of recognition for what is already in place and trying to build on those things rather than introducing a brand new concept that hadn't been tried or tested. I suppose the original question, Sandra, was around, is this a threat to volunteering? And you know, like Anthony and like Wendy, there is no such thing as paid volunteering, and as soon as we do start to muddy those waters, it's a very dangerous place, I think, for us to go in terms of what we've all been working for as volunteer practitioners, in terms of that recognition and the boundaries around what volunteering is and what volunteering isn't. And also, just the last thing I'm going to say is, I think that the report also, not just in the youth side of this and about the service for young people, it misses out talking about the infrastructure that has to exist behind the volunteering to make it happen. So it doesn't talk about that, which is another reason why I think it shows itself to be ill-informed.
Thanks, Helen. Anybody else want to reflect? See, Mo, you're also saying you forgot to mention you pay people for skills that will remove a large group of adolescents experience under 18s from the opportunities. So again, that's something else to think about.
I have a question for young peers in the room or the screen.
That's definitely not me then.
If you were offered a scheme where you would be paid for your services for something you've been doing for, let's say, the past year, would you be okay with that, or would you be a questionable thing for you?
Can I say something?
Yes, please, Lucinda.
I mean, I probably would do it, but then it wouldn't come from a place of authenticity, I don't think. Like, I'd be doing it just for the money part. And I think like a lot of my friends would definitely jump at the opportunity to volunteer for money because you gain something out of it. But then like, you probably won't be putting your heart and soul into it. And when I think of volunteering, I think of it coming from a place of the heart, not from a place of trying to get stuff out of it. Else I'd just apply for a job at Primark instead of, you know, helping someone in a local community.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then, you know, I do think the motivation is key in these discussions. You know, why do young people volunteer in the first place? And, you know, Mo, you talked a lot about the roles, what people actually do and what they choose to do, or as opposed to, you know, a role being forced on you. And I think that's really important concept. Nicola and Ryan, I'm going to choose you as two other young people. What would you say in response to Mo's question?
I think it's interesting to think about the expectation that would maybe be placed around the opportunity, whether when it comes to volunteering at the minute, if you aren't able to make it or just don't turn up, you're not shunned and told you're never allowed to come back again. Whereas if I wasn't to turn up to work in the morning, there would be serious questions around why I didn't appear. So I think there's that question around the expectation. If I started volunteering but I'm getting paid, is there a certain expectation of the amount of hours that I have to complete? Or, you know, if I wasn't able to turn up, is there going to be questions around, am I able to continue that opportunity?
Sorry, can I also say, is that okay, Sandra?
Absolutely, Helen, please do.
I think I agree very much with what Nicola said there. And I think when you start to pay volunteering, I work with a youth development project down in Corrine, and volunteering, we use it an awful lot. And it's a way of helping the young people who haven't had experience or worked in paid employment. I think a gentle route into learning about team dynamics, about timekeeping, about all those skills required before they enter paid employment. To make volunteering then paid, I think would put an additional pressure onto young people. And young people do feel pressure at the moment. Maybe it's through social media or whatever, to be perfect at everything, to get, you know, to not ask for help and to be able to do it straight away. Whereas within a volunteering capacity, I think it's just a bit more gentler, and you're volunteering and you're learning and it's an experience, as opposed to if you're being paid for it, is there then an expectation that you're going to be really efficient at it straight away? I just think from the young people that we help support volunteering, it might overwhelm them a bit, the thought that it's in a paid capacity as opposed to just, you know, for their benefit as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's very valid, Helen, and indeed the other Helen sums it up as well in terms of saying, you know, we need to think about the real threat for young people that exists. That's absolutely right. But unemployment, lack of opportunities for skills building, those are all real things out there. So we're not saying that creating paid opportunities for young people is a bad thing, because unfortunately, you know, we all do need the pound signs. But it's about making sure we don't dilute the definition of volunteering, and we make sure that volunteering is still an option, that it's still there and it's still completely valid. And Anthony, you're saying there about it changes the relationship between the volunteering and the project. And absolutely, it's a completely different relationship. And even Nicola alluded to that.
Sandra,
in terms of,
if I may add just one last point, if it becomes a thing on your budget or an Excel sheet as a bottom line, then it takes away from the heart. And if a company or an organization says, you know, we engaged 30 young people and we paid 30 grand to do it, it becomes a very tokenistic way of engaging young people. So the word meaningful then is just being used in the report for the sake of it. It is not, and whoever pays, as Nicola rightly suggested, it dictates the agenda. They inform the definition of her expectations and her rules. So young people have come a long way when it comes to being defined, and it's high time we define ourselves. Sorry.
Absolutely. Anybody else, anything to add? Because that's quite a good note to end on, Mo, in terms of what you're saying, because obviously volunteering, the reason we're all here is we all believe in volunteering, and like Jane has given fantastic statistics there in terms of the benefits of young people volunteering. So let's hold on to that as best we can. Anybody else, any parting thoughts or comments? Because everybody has an opportunity to speak here. So if you haven't had an opportunity, please shout now. That be enough? Okay, well, listen, I will just finish by thanking Mo for his contribution. That was really useful to get those comments from yourself, and just for somebody to have unpacked that report a little bit more in more detail. That has been really, really helpful. Jane, thank you for bringing the statistics and the Northern Ireland context to the picture. To each of you, thank you for coming. Can I say that these full sessions continue every week. There's one next week is about keeping volunteers safe through the pandemic, and then the other one is at the beginning of December, is about incentivization and volunteering. So again, some of the same sort of themes that we've been talking about today, I suspect, will come out at that one as well. And then our last one for 2020, isn't that weird saying that, is about remote volunteer management, motivating volunteers from a distance, which is what we have all been doing for the best part of 2020. So thank you so much for your contribution. You know where we are, you know where Volunteer Now is. If you need help, certainly we've been talking with young people today, and we have two youth workers working for us in terms of promoting youth volunteering. Please come and talk to them if you need help with anything in that direction. Okay, so thanks everybody, and hopefully see you soon. Mo, thanks again. Okay.
Thanks, Andra. Thanks,
Bye.
Wendy.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.